Stop. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin Ashraf al-Anbiya'i wal Mursaleen wa ala alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin wa sahabati al-akrameen wa tabi'ina lahum bi ihsan ila yawmiddin wa alayna ma'ahum wa fihim bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. MashaAllah, Allah has blessed us with this very beautiful rain. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. It reminds me there was not too long ago, a few years ago actually, when one of our teachers, the grandson of Habib Ahmad Shura Haddad, was visiting him. And we went about 25 minutes away, and the intention was that we were going to go into this outdoor location and recite the Burda Sharifa. And there was rain in the forecast, but we decided to go anyway. And so we hiked. It was a short hike, but by the time we got to the place, it just started pouring down rain to the point where even if you try to get back to the car, you're going to get soaked. So he said, you know what? We're just going to stay right here. And those who decided to stay, we were soaking wet from head to toe. The rain was literally pouring down. But it was as if that we weren't even wet at all. We actually stayed soaking wet and recited the entire Burda. Were you there, Jason? And that we stayed there for the entire Burda. And then khalas, you can worry about it later. So a little bit of rain won't hurt, alhamdulillah. If it starts rushing into the tent, ma'alish, don't worry about it. We're going to keep going, inshallah ta'ala. Khair. So we will continue our study. This is now session number 4, and it's a continuation of the previous session. Ustaz Amjad, his task was to look at the first 5 benefits of hunger. So of course, as we mentioned last night, this idea of virtue and benefit, they go hand in hand. And they are, of course, closely related. The virtue focus a little bit more on thinking in the broader sense why this is so important. But then the benefits get in a very practical ways that this is why this is so important, meaning that these are the practical benefits that we get from this idea of controlling our appetite, or literally that hunger, as Imam al-Ghazali presents it. So we've reached the fa'idat as-sadisa, the 6th benefit. And this is where he says, daf an-nawm wa dawam as-sahar. And one thing just before we start, I did think it's important to say as well, it is important when we read the Ihya, is you actually have to let it do its work. So my advice would be, and I'm not saying don't write down questions and don't think about the material, of course, think about the material and think about how it applies to you. But let it do its work. It has a very strong impact on the heart. Even when we read it with its English translation, even if we don't read every single word of it, you will feel its impact on the heart. And then once the heart is impacted, then it's easier for the outward dimension to follow. If the heart is not impacted and it remains hard and that unimpacted, then it's that much difficult outwardly to do what Imam al-Ghazali is saying. So let it do its work. And yes, there will be certain things that we struggle with. There'll be certain things that we just can't grapple our minds around it. We're trying to figure this out, and just either at the realm of the conceptual, or how can we actually practically put this into, bring this into our lives. But I would say, to a certain degree, resist that urge and just let it do its work. Let's take it for what it is, and then, inshallah ta'ala, Allah will facilitate for us, put it in a way that's pleasing to Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this next benefit, the 6th benefit, consists in the repulsion of sleep and acquiring the ability to remain awake for long periods. So again, what the underlying assumption here is, and Imam al-Ghazali says this in other parts of the Ihya and in other parts of his, in other sections and other works. From a spiritual perspective, it's not considered a good thing to sleep too much. Okay, now when we speak from a health perspective, of course, sleep is absolutely essential, and we want to make sure that we're getting proper sleep and the right amount of sleep. We want to make sure that we have right sleep hygiene. All of that is understood, and in fact, that's actually in our time where we probably have to start because our sleep hygiene is so bad. And it's like so many other things, including food, so many other things where the quality of our sleep is not like the quality of sleep in previous times. And there's multiple factors. Many of those are totally out of our control. All of these anyhow, that's a whole topic on itself. But the point here is that what he's saying is it's actually considered to be a good thing to, just as we want to cut back on our food intake, we also want to cut back on our sleep intake. Or the very least that you could say is not to just that uncontrollably eat or uncontrollably sleep. There's a benefit in doing so. What he's bringing here is the correlation between too much food and too much sleep. So he goes on to say the following about this. A man who eats his fill will drink abundantly, and whoever drinks abundantly will sleep abundantly also. So too much food, too much drink, too much sleep. For this reason, one of the shuyukh, one of the teachers, that he said that ma'ashir al-muridin, speaking to his students, O group of students, do not eat much, lest you drink much, which will cause you to sleep much and therefore to lose much, meaning missed opportunities. And so Imam al-Ghazali, again, in another point, he says is that the most that you should sleep is 8 hours. Now, of course, that young children are different than that children that get in their teenage years are different than when you get older years, and each person is different. What we're really calling to is balance, of course. So those of you that are thinking about sending your kids to this seminary, don't worry, is that your kids, of course, are getting very good sleep, because I'm sure they're doing exactly what we're telling us, and what we're telling them, to get to bed very early so they can get up early for school. And I'm sure they all followed that. If you go down to the male or female dorm or wherever they're staying, is that by 10:30 they're all in bed and khalas, ready for the next day, and they're not using their phones or that staying up late watching Netflix or scrolling on social media or anything like that. They would never do that. So we are proponents of balance here, so don't worry. But it is important to recognize it is considered to be a spiritual virtue that little by little to cut back, or at very least remain in control, to not sleep too much. Find what works for you. There are some people that can function very well off 5.5 hours of sleep at night. Other people need a solid 7 hours. Some people can push it a little bit during the week, and you develop a little bit of a sleep debt, and then you want to sleep a little bit longer on the weekend to catch up. But if you're not doing it for spiritual purposes and you're accruing severe sleep debt and masking it with caffeine and coffee, that is very unhealthy and not what Imam al-Ghazali is referring to. And we would stand with you on that and be against that. And that health professionals that point to the dangers here, that we would agree wholeheartedly and highly advise against that. What we want is balance. But there is this idea that of excess. And so there's a correlation between eating too much, but then if you eat more, that you want to drink more, and then if you eat more and then drink more, naturally, it could that lead to more sleep. Then Imam al-Ghazali says here that وَأَجْمَعَ رَأْيُ سَبْعِينَ صِدِّيقًا أَنَّ كَثْرَةَ النَّوْمِ and كَثْرَةَ الشُّرْبِ. 70 truthful saints have agreed that abundant sleep is the result of drinking water in abundance. So that's something that we also want to think about. The people I trust when it comes to this is that, yes, on one hand, that our teacher Hakim Salim Khan said, is that it is a health crisis, how chronically dehydrated people are. And part of that is because when they do drink, they don't tend to drink the right thing. They tend to drink types of drinks that are actually going to make things worse. And there's certain things that actually even dehydrate you further, even though it's actually in liquid form. So part of that is that our primary drink that we drink should be water when we drink water. occasionally having a flavored drink here and there, or fresh juice or something of that nature. If we're going to juice, there's certain types of juices that are better. If we're going to have smoothies and so forth, but that primarily it should just be water when we that hydrate ourselves. I lost my train of thought. What were we saying there? Allahumma salli alayhi wa adam. But so this whole thing is that every human being has to drink 8-ounce glasses of water every single day. Yani, not so sure how accurate that is for every single person of every different temperament. The summer is very different than the winter, and people's body sizes are different, their weights are different. And, there's truth to the fact that we should be drinking water, but again, not too little or not too much. You don't want to be dehydrated, nor do you want to drink too much, nor is it can't be healthy to force yourself to drink water when you don't need it. So find that balance in relation to what works for you, and try to have the majority of what you drink be water to hydrate yourselves. But what he's saying here is that he's talking about that cutting back on our food intake. When we cut back our food intake, and it will also help us to cut back on how much it is that we need to drink, and then it will that help us in relation to sleep. And then he goes on to say, and why we should consider cutting back slightly on our sleep. Sleeping abundantly is a waste of one's lifetime and causes one to miss the tahajjud prayer, and results in a dull disposition and a hardness of heart. So he's talking now spiritually. When it becomes imbalanced, this is what happens. Sleeping too much, it's a waste of our time. You're sleeping. And there's a hadith where our Prophet said, is that an-nawm akhul maut. Sleep is the brother of death. And this is a hadith. And then the Prophet went on to say, وَأَهْلُ الْجَنَّةِ لَا يَنَامُونَ. And the people of paradise don't sleep. So there's no sleep in paradise. And there are some people who like to sleep so much is that you wish that you could, that sleep in paradise, but there's no such thing. And then there's this really interesting debate. This is one of these detailed scholarly debates, is that when we talk about benefit from sleep, when do you benefit from sleep? Before you sleep, while you sleep, or after you sleep? How could it be before when you haven't even slept yet? How could it be during when you're not conscious to even know that you're benefiting from it? And then how could it really be after if you're no longer sleeping? And anyhow, they get into these very beautiful, detailed scholarly debates. I would probably say that after you've benefited the most from it, even though you're not actually sleeping, because of how you feel and the energy that comes. Anyhow, the point here is that sleeping, if you think about it, we're not doing anything. And this is where Imam al-Ghazali says that 8 hours is the max we're sleeping, because he says it's enough that 1/3 of our life is in a state of sleep. Now, this is not to say that sleep is not important, because if someone sleeps with the right intention, in the right way, the right amount, you actually get reward for your sleep. Your sleep becomes ibadah and worship. And that's really the perspective that you want to have. Find out how much you need, be balanced, and make the right intention. And then even if you're not active, which you're not while you're sleeping, have good sleep hygiene, and you actually get reward for your sleep, because you're strengthening yourself for the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But think about how many opportunities that we've missed because we don't sleep on time. And then thus we're not able to wake up. So think about nowadays. And nowadays, Isha doesn't even come in until about 10, 12, 10, 13. So we pray here at 10:20. And even if you're completely ready for bed, you pray Isha and then go to sleep. Usually like the earliest that you can get to bed is like 11. This time of year in the summer, where we are, and you get closer to the equator, it gets a little bit easier. You get further north, so our folks from Canada, it gets a little bit harder. You get further north in places like Europe, then it gets even harder, where they have like a tiny window between Isha and Fajr. It gets very difficult in the summer. But the point here is that you have to prepare yourself and get right to bed. If you postpone it, you're limiting your ability to benefit from the night. And the night is one of the most important things of all, yani how we use it for the spiritual path and purifying our heart and drawing near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you get to bed late, then you're preventing yourself. So if you went to bed at 12:30 last night, the likelihood of you being here for the pre-fajr Awrad is very slim, let alone if it was at 1 or at 1:30. And so if you have any after Mawlid parties tonight, my advice to you is to not do that, to get to sleep. You already did a Mawlid. Any after late night nasheed sessions, it's better to actually sleep, to get here for Fajr, to get here for the reflection session, then so you can get proper rest for the sessions tomorrow morning. Then he says, and he then ties this in again to the broader perspective. A lifetime is the most precious of jewels. So why is he talking about sleep and cutting back on sleep? A lifetime is the most precious of jewels and constitutes a bondsman's capital with which he trades. Sleep, on the other hand, is a kind of death. For when indulged into excess in it, it shortens one's lease on life. In addition, the manifestly great merit which attaches to the tahajjud prayer. The tahajjud prayer is where you sleep and then wake up and pray before Allah before Fajr enters, will pass one by if one sleeps abundantly. And to the extent that one is overcome by drowsiness, one will not taste the sweetness of worship. So we want to put sleep in its proper place. And part of how we do that is controlling the diet. This is one of the keys to that when we eat and stopping, and this is why it's not good for you spiritually or physically to eat too late or too heavy too late. And then certain types of foods that eating many of those too late, these things have various degrees of impact that then affect the quality of our sleep, as opposed to that eating fairly early and being fully digested and then ready to sleep, your sleep is going to be a lot better. No. So this is the sixth benefit, is that it will help us that cut back on our sleep. And that clearly is a virtue with all of the conditions that were previously mentioned. And if we can have blessing in our sleep, cut back on its time, and still have the energy that we need, that clearly is a virtue and something that we would hope for, so that we can use more of our waking hours for the sake of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. And the only other thing that I'll say about that is, in relation to sleep, is the stronger that the ruh becomes, the stronger that your spirit becomes, is the more blessing there will be in your sleep and the less that you'll actually need. So strengthening the ruh, and the greatest way that we do that is through dhikr of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. Deep dhikr where we're fully concentrating, present with Allah over extended periods of time consistently, will transform you at every level of your being. And one of the main ways it affects you is in relation to sleep and being able to need less just by virtue of the impact of that dhikr on your soul. And this is how you can understand that we're not even going to really mention a lot of what he says here about some of these feats of these blessed people and how long that they actually stayed awake, how little they actually ate, but their bodies were fully intact. They wouldn't have been able to do that if their bodies weren't intact, if they didn't have energy, if they were drowsy all the time. There's something else happening, and this is that barakah effect, if you will, as it has been termed. So then this takes us to the seventh benefit, which is taysir al-muwadhabati al-ibadah. The seventh benefit is that lengthy acts of worship are made easier. Food prevents a man from worshiping much, since he needs a time in which he busies himself with eating. It may require time for buying and cooking food as well. He needs time to wash his hands and to pick his teeth and will make many visits to the privy, yani the bathroom, because of having drunk so much. Were he to spend the hours he used up in these activities in the remembrance of Allah, intimate communing with Him, yani munajah, where we are intimately conversing with Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the other varieties of worship, he would benefit greatly. And so there's a lot of truth to this. And even from a health perspective, it is very wise to eat simple foods. So I was speaking about that a little bit in the last session about what Michael Pollan was saying about the type of foods that we need to eat, but eating simple foods, simple meals. Now, occasionally, if you have guests, it's fine without going into what is called takalluf, where you are doing more than you're able to do. That's fine. But on a regular basis, it is wiser to eat simple foods that are easier to cook, that don't take as much time to prepare. This is a beautiful thing. This is a good thing for your health and for your spirituality. And if you make the intention in doing so to help you in those two ways, you get reward. You can still enjoy the food, but you get reward for doing it. So there doesn't have to be 3 or 4 side dishes. It should be simple. Healthy, wholesome, and simple. And so in doing this, is that think about how much time that saves. Again, we're not talking about the rare circumstance where we're having guests and things, but in general, we can save time in terms of the groceries that we have to get, in terms of the money that we have to expend, and so forth. So the great Imam of this path, Sariya Saqati, is that he said, I once saw Ali al-Jurjani eating barley porridge with his fingers. And what made you do this? I asked him. He said, I have calculated that the difference between chewing bread and eating this way is 70 subhanallahs. So I have not chewed bread for 40 years. La ilaha illallah. Now, that might be at the highest degree. That's like when we talk about the stations of the religion from 1 to 9, 9 being the highest. That's 9. This is the highest degree of all. We might not be able to be there where we intentionally only eat certain types of food because we're that precise, but there's definitely things that we can do. And there's things that we might want to consider in our food habits. And again, what we do from time to time is different than what we do regularly. From time to time, yes, we might go all out. We might drive quite a distance to a restaurant for a special occasion. All of that in our context is fine, and I would even say encouraged because of where we're at. But how are we on a regular basis? The more that we consider these things, the better for us, but in a balanced way. And of course, if you have a family, that you got to get them on board. So we don't want to say, okay, we're having that children porridge for the next 2 months, so I can do more tasbihat. Yeah, I need little small increments of change are good. And Imam al-Ghazali says, see how concerned he was for his time. He would not even waste it chewing. Every breath of a man's lifespan is a precious and priceless gem. Since he must lay up a great treasure house of these gems, which will survive into the afterlife, he must address himself to the remembrance and worship of Allah. So this is why, and when he explains why, it makes us understand all of that easily. This is why he's tying it back to this. If you look at what he's done, I was marking it in my book as Ustad Amjad was going through these previous benefits. Look at all of these benefits that he's pointing to. We're talking about cutting back on our food intake, and this is why when we talked about the path, the ilm tariq al-akhirah, the path, the science of the path to the hereafter, how you see this interwoven into almost every conversation Imam al-Ghazali has in this book, and the way that they relate one to another. We're just talking about something as mundane as food, a basic human need, which is food. But in controlling that, look at these benefits that he's saying, is that the ghayat al-maqsud min ibadat al-fikr, what is ultimately sought from worship, is fikr, true states of reflection, and musil and ma'rifah, that will lead us to knowledge of Allah, what istibsar bi haqa'iq al-haq, and to be aware of the realities of truth. And eating too much prevents that. Subhanallah. Like something as mundane, but it relates to these very big affairs in this way. And then talking about hardness of the heart and how eating too much that prevents us from being present in our prayers, present with the dhikr that it is that we are reciting, and how it relates to lowering ourselves before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and being humble before Him, and on and on and on. And then that fifth benefit, which he said was the greatest, which is being able to tame ourselves and to force ourselves to be in states of obedience. This is amazing. How something as simple as eating is really as important as it really is. And being aware of this is very much a part of our deen and a part of the spiritual path. And so, by cutting back on our food intake, it frees us up. It frees us up for worship. And so then he goes on to say, among the things which are made impossible by excessive eating are retaining the condition of ritual purity in spending much time in the mosque. For someone who eats abundantly is obliged to leave the mosque in order to relieve themselves. And this is one of the things I've seen with our teachers. It's actually phenomenal how long they're able to keep their wudu. And I remember being on a plane ride where it was a red-eye flight, and then we arrived, and then time had passed after we arrived. So last time they had made their wudu was well before takeoff, the entire flight, keeping the wudu, and then all the way until Asr time of the next day. And it's like, subhanallah. And this is not like in a bad way. If some way, it's actually very unhealthy if there's a need to do that. But this again points to something very different. The people of Allah are just different. This is because of their balancing out all of these normal body functions enables them to do these things. And if someone's always in need of relieving themselves, that clearly it's going to be harder for them to make wudu and to be in a state of wudu. And our Prophet taught us is that only a believer will remain in a state of wudu. وَلَا يُحَافِظْ عَلَى وُضُوءٍ إِلَّا مُؤْمِنٌ. So maintaining a state of wudu is something very important. It's the silah of the believer. It's a deep protection from a lot of the things that we're exposed to in the unseen. By being in a state of wudu, it's there to protect us. And then he says, among them likewise is fasting. So this seventh benefit is about taysir al-ibadah, making worship easier. So by eating less, that you're able to remain in a state of wudu, that you're able to fast more, which is easier for a man who is accustomed to hunger. So if you're used to eating a lot, then when you fast, you're going to notice that more as opposed to as if you're eating in a more balanced way. Fasting together with spending time in the mosque and remain in a state of ritual purity and turning one's meal times into times of worship yield a great profit which can only be despised by those who are heedless and do not know the value of religion, and who are instead, and then that quotes a verse, that content with the life of this world and feels secure therein. And then يَعْلَمُونَ الظَّاهِرَ مِنَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَهُمْ عَنِ الْآخِرَةِ هُمْ غَافِلُونَ, and who know only the appearance of the life of this world and are heedless of the afterlife. And then he quotes Abu Sulaiman al-Darani, one of the great Imams of this path. He's pointed out disadvantages of satiety by saying, whosoever eats his fill is attended by 6 defects. He loses the sweetness of intimately conversing with Allah. He is unable to memorize divine wisdom. He is denied compassion for others. So some of these were already spoken about. He finds worship to be burdensome. His desires become stronger. And while other believers are at the mosques, those who have eaten their fill are at the rubbish heaps and the latrines, emptying their stomachs. I said you have to just open your ears and just let it let it sit in. So then the eighth benefit. يستفيد من قلة الأكل صحة البدن ودفع الأمراض. The eighth benefit is the bodily health which results from eating little. Now, health is important. For the vast majority of people, the whole reason that they want good health in the good health industry is so that they could maximize their worldly life out of the love of the world. That's the vast majority of people are that. That's still not bad because you still want people to be healthy. But for us, it's slightly different. The number one reason we want good health is to keep strong for the worship of Allah and to have long, productive lives that are in the obedience of Allah Ta'ala. When our Prophet said, is the best year of those who live the longest and that do the most actions. Man tala umrahu wa hasana amalahu. They have long lives and they do the very best works. And so wanting to live a long time in this world, if it's to prepare for the hereafter, that's praiseworthy. If it is to just prolong your worldly life because you detest to return to Allah, that's blameworthy. Now, we all naturally dislike the idea of death. That's a natural dislike. What we're talking about now is at the level of the intention. And the vast majority of people, if you would dig deep, why you, so for the very few, or maybe whatever percentage are actually concerned with their health, why are you concerned with your health? A lot of it is just this obsession of remaining young and looking young and being wrinkle-free, and a lot of it relates to worldly reasons. A lot of it relates to how they look in front of the eyes of people and so forth. No, be healthy, but for the right reasons. Don't do it for people, right? Do it for the right reasons. Don't do it just to merely remain longer here on earth. You're going to die no matter how healthy you are eventually. There's a limit. Do it for the right reasons. Make the right intention. In cutting back on your food intake, in order to have good health and wanting good health in general, for primarily spiritual reasons, i.e., in preparation for the hereafter, is a noble thing. But then also to have better quality of life is also a great intention to make. So that you have better quality of life, so that you can use the moments of your life in a way that is pleasing to Allah Ta'ala. Because clearly, if you are ill, it is harder to worship. And the quality of your worship is likely to diminish. So he says, for diseases are caused by overeating and by the presence of a residue, and this is the traditional medicine, of a residue of humors in the stomach and the arteries. Illness prevents one from worshiping. It distracts the heart and stands in the way of remembrance and reflection. It spoils one's life and obliges one to submit to bloodletting and cupping, into drinking medicines and seeing physicians, all of which requires money, which in turn can only be obtained through things which require that one exhaust oneself in avoiding various kinds of sins and desires. Hunger makes all of this unnecessary. And he mentions this really nice story. It is told that the Caliph Harun al-Rashid once summoned 4 physicians, one who was Indian, one who was Greek, an Iraqi, and a Sawadi. A Sawadi is that, as you see in the explanatory note there, from the agricultural region of south central Iraq. Yani someone who's from the, not a city dweller. And said, let each one of you describe that medicine which itself results in no sickness. The Indian spoke up and said, in my opinion, the medicine which contains no sickness is black myrobalan. Now, you'll have to look all these up. It's apparently an herb that is used to treat various ailments. The Iraqi said, for me, it is nasturtium cress. The Greek said, I think it is hot water. And the Sawadi, who was the most learned of them, said, myrobalan scours the stomach, and that constitutes a sickness. Nasturtium cress renders the stomach oily, and that is a sickness also. Hot water slackens the stomach, and that also constitutes a sickness. And so Rashid asked him, then what is your answer? And he replied, in my opinion, the medicine, which contains no sickness, consists in refraining from food until one has an appetite and in ceasing to eat when one is yet unsated. You've spoken truly, he declared. So what does that mean? Is that if you're not hungry, why would you eat? Only eating when you start to get hungry. And stop eating before you are fully sated. That principle in and of itself, there's incredible wisdom. Incredible wisdom. And then he quotes a story here of one of the people in the book who was a philosopher and also a physician. Once heard the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, 1/3 for food, 1/3 for drinking, 1/3 for the breath. And astonished, he declared, I have never heard wiser words than these concerning frugality and eating. These are wise words indeed. And if you really think about this, this is amazing. The first book in the second quarter of the Ihya, because remember we said the second quarter is about our dealings, the things that we usually do with people, even though someone can, of course, eat alone, is on food. It's actually an entire book on the adab of akal, the etiquettes of eating, and we're going to review some of that here shortly. And so look at the statement. Whoever eats wheat bread and nothing else, and does so with due propriety, shall never fall sick, save with his mortal illness. And this is not a guarantee, and who knows if we can find this type of bread. Most of the wheat bread, unfortunately, now is very inflammatory and actually not good for us. But the point here is, we all probably know people from the generation before us, many of whom lived in traditional places in the Muslim world, that might have migrated here. I even see this with my wife's parents, for instance. They almost never eat out. They rarely ever eat out. And when they cook food, it's not some like gross canned food. They cook real food. And of course, we just said we should cut back on time. Cooking real food does take a little bit more time. But that extra time to cook real food is actually really worth it, as opposed to just taking more time to cook to have more dishes. That's different. But taking the extra time that it takes to, look at the difference. And for a while there that I was trying to have regularly that oats for breakfast. Look at the difference between that instant oatmeal and between real oatmeal. Right? Steel cut oatmeal, you have to cook it for about 25 minutes before you actually, and sometimes you always don't have 25 minutes. But if you look and notice the effect that has on you as opposed to some instant oatmeal, it's a very different thing. And so there's something that we really want to consider there, how we can eat more wholesome food, and in the process try to avoid a lot of this stuff. And the general rule is that the more ingredients is that the worse it is. And then of course that we have this blessed hadith of our Prophet ﷺ that's mentioned in At-Tabarani, and it usually is spoken about, and he mentions this as well in the chapter on fasting. The hadith says, fast and you will be healthy. Sumu tasihhu. And what Imam al-Ghazali says about this is, he says, fasting, hunger, and eating less conduce therefore to the health of the body, so that it becomes free of disorders, and of the heart, which becomes free of the disease of rebellion and exaltation, as well as a number of other complaints. So we'll take the last 2 benefits here, but before we do that, I do want to just remind ourselves of some considerations when we talk about eating, and that these are much more practical considerations. And do we have until 12:45? Is that the time the session is supposed to end? So we're just going to review here. Now, we're going to go through this very quickly. This was taken from the retreat we did that quite a long time ago on book 11, which is on eating. So we're just going to review some of the etiquettes of eating. So there's etiquettes that are before eating the right food, halal and tayyib. We're going to come to that in a little bit more detail. Eating when hungry, meaning after the previous meal has been digested. Being content with the food one has. Eating before one prays if the food is desired. Eating with as many people as possible. And there was a clip going around of Sheikh Hamza saying this, was that the greatest thing that's ever been said about food is the Prophet saying this, is that the best food is the one that has the most hands in it. What an amazing thing to say. Washing the hands, sitting in the recommended way, eating on the ground using a floor cloth, a sufra, intending to strengthen oneself for acts of obedience. All of these, and don't worry, I can send this out to you. You don't have to rush to write all these down. I have the PDF and we can send it out. Then, while eating, beginning with the Bismillah, saying the recommended supplication, using the right hand, taking small bites, chewing well. So you want to actually find out how long it takes, and you'll see how you can refine yourself through eating. Food loses its taste by about like 7 or 8 chews. And there's no incentive after that, unless that you think of it spiritually, to keep chewing. So you just swallow. That's not as good for you as continuing to chew your food until it's almost nothing left, and then it's so much easier to digest. Not taking another bite until the first bite is swallowed. So as opposed to, right? Swallow completely, pause, breathe, take another bite. Not criticizing food, not blowing on food to cool it down. Eating the food that is near one, and if you're eating that on a plate with multiple people. Minimizing food intake. So that's before eating, and now while eating, and then that after eating. Not eating until satiety. Using the fingers to finish all remaining food and sauce. And that was something that was very much a part of this. I remember my grandfather, who lived in Kansas City, Kansas, suburb of it, Leawood, Kansas, is that whenever he would make us mop, if there was any sauce left, he'd give us bread and make us mop the plate so that nothing was left. Now, we know now that doing that, the plate actually makes istighfar for you and seeks forgiveness for you. Now, I'm not talking about if someone has reached their fill and to make them eat a whole bunch of other food after the fill. What I'm talking about, if someone eats and they just leave like a couple potatoes and a couple things, like, you've already eaten, finish your food. That's very different than forcing someone to eat a quantity that is anymore. Put a little on your plate, right? And I know that there's the tendency to want people to eat a lot, and it makes parents very happy to see people eat a lot, especially if they're little children and they're terrified when they're too skinny. But balance is what we want in these things. And then we have the etiquettes after. So using the fingers to finish all the remaining sauce, licking the fingers. I don't care what anyone says. People think that's gross or whatever. A'udhu billah. It is a sunnah of Rasulullah. And you need to condition yourself to understand that that is a sunnah, because it is the sunnah of the best of creation. We don't care what anyone thinks about that. Wiping the fingers on a napkin, eating pieces of food that have may fallen outside of the dish. That's sunnah. As opposed to like, ew, it fell. Like, that's sunnah. Washing the hands, flossing the teeth, rinsing the mouth, thanking Allah Ta'ala for the blessing of the food, and saying the recommended supplication. Then we have a whole set of etiquettes. Look at the way that, see how food, how important it is? Look at the opportunities that we have when we eat to draw near to Allah Ta'ala. Every one of these sunnahs that you follow becomes a door that opens up between you and Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. Then we have etiquettes of drinking. Not drinking while eating unless there is a need. Beginning with the Bismillah, using the right hand. Drinking in sips, not gulps. Drinking in 3 swallows. Sitting, not standing or reclining. Not breathing or belching in the vessel. Looking into the vessel before drinking. Passing it to the right if other people are present and you're drinking out of the same cup or bowl. Saying the dua after and thanking Allah Ta'ala. And then there's etiquettes of eating with others, and that etiquettes of eating with friends, and so forth and so on. But you can start to see here, in the purpose here is just to remind ourselves of, this benefit, these health benefits, and especially that there's overlap here in terms of there being sunnahs, but also that being health benefits. And we did a seminar, and we're planning to do this seminar every year with our students that was on diet and nutrition. And there are a number of different important considerations here when we talk about this. And that considerations of food and eating. One, and Imam al-Ghazali is going to talk about this in the next section. The permissibility of the food, the quality of the food, the quantity of food, the manner of eating, the time of eating, and the psychological state of the person eating. And at some point, we'll see when we can get to it, we do want to mention there's some notes that we've arranged that can help us overcome these tendencies to binge eat, where that our eating habits start to control us as opposed to us being in control. There are things that we can do. And so that there's a number of very practical, helpful things that we can talk about that B'idhnillahi ta'ala will find the right time in order to do that. But then I think one of the most important things that we can say now is that when we talk about something being halal, that is the first step. But then tayyib, if we differentiate, we're now that it's wholesome, meaning that it's healthy for the body, it is good for the mind, and it is pure and will be more delicious and tasty, which is not necessarily sought for in terms of this is just what naturally happens. And then you have these other aspects in the modern world of what we can consider to be tayyib. Things like organic, local, seasonal, cruelty-free, fair trade, according to temperament, and so forth and so on. So there's a lot there. And there's a lot of different types of diets that are floating out there. One of the ones that I would recommend, and it's a very short book, very easy to read, is a small book called Food Between Curse and Cure. And there's some really helpful things in there where he talks about foods to just simply avoid. Fast food, GMOs, processed food to the extent possible, white refined sugar, unhealthy vegetable oils and fats, wheat, and other foods associated with the Western diet, which tends to be extremely unhealthy and very problematic. A lot more could be said there, but this goes hand in hand with what Imam al-Ghazali is saying here, is that by cutting back on our food intake, especially if we start to open up the door to consider some of these other things, it is going to be better for us spiritually. It's going to be able to help us. It's going to be able to give us the energy that is that we need to have the state of mind and being to be able to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that throughout the day and the night. And then this takes us to the ninth benefit, which lies in reduced expenditure. Whoever becomes used to eating little will find a modest income sufficient, whereas a man who is habituated to eating his fill will find that his belly becomes a creditor impossible to shake off, who seizes him by the throat every day saying, "What will you eat today?" Therefore, will he be compelled to enter into all sorts of activities and earn from unlawful pursuits so that he sins, or from lawful ones which will involve him in humiliation and exhaustion. He may even need to direct his wishful gaze towards other people, which is the utmost form of abasement and degradation. A believer's needs are few. A sage once remarked that I satisfy most of my needs by renouncing them, which is moreover more restful for my heart. Someone else said, whenever I feel a wish to borrow money from someone for the sake of satisfying a desire or making an investment, I borrow from myself, whereupon I renounce the desire. Thus am I my own best creditor. Ibrahim Adham, may Allah have mercy upon him, used to ask his companions about the price of food. When he told that it was high, he would say, lower it with renunciation. Okay. And then he ties it to the path of the hereafter. In sum, then the reason why people are destroyed lies in their greed for the things of this world. The reason why people are destroyed lies in their greed for the things of this world. Our Prophet himself said, "Hubb dunya ra'su kulli khatiyah." The love of this world is the fountainhead of all wrong. This greed is in turn produced by desire for food and sexual desire, the latter being the upshot of the former. All these gates may be closed by a frugal diet. They are gates to hell, which, when shut, open gates into heaven. As the Prophet ﷺ said, make use of hunger to knock persistently on the gates of heaven. That is mentioned in Qut al-Qulub, that hadith. Therefore, whoever is satisfied with a single loaf each day will be satisfied in respect of his other desires also, and will be liberated, since he will have no need of others, and will find rest from worldly pursuits, so that he may devote himself to the worship of Allah and to trading for the afterlife, thereby joining those described as Allah by Allah as men who neither commerce nor sale distract from the remembrance of Allah. Such people are freed from this beguilement merely because, by virtue of contentment with their lot, they can dispense with it. He who needs more, however, must needs be beguiled. Yani, is that he'll be distracted and prevented from these great virtues. So again, when we speak about this, is we should really think about, and this actually be a very good thing to do, how much are we spending on food every single month? How much are we spending on food? Whether it be groceries, whether it be eating out, whether it be snacks and things like ice cream, but let's see how much we're spending on food. And let's really think about what would be more responsible in relation to those expenditures. Of course, family size differs. There's different factors that are here, but the more simple that we are, the better. And this leads into the 10th benefit. And the 10th benefit is that the aspirant is enabled to put others before himself and to give in charity to the orphans and the poor that which is surplus to his wants. And then he quotes that on the Day of Judgment, he will be shaded by his charity, as is stated in a hadith. That which he eats is stored in the privy, while that which he gives in charity goes to the storehouse, which is Allah's grace. Therefore, man benefits from his wealth only insofar as he gives it away, which he will have rendered it permanent. So when you give it away, that there's permanent benefit that remains. Just as when he eats it, he destroys it, and when he wears it out. To give away food, what one does not need, is far better, therefore, than indigestion and satiety. So then there's some that we won't read here, but then he summarizes by saying, such then are the 10 benefits of hunger. Under each one are subsumed countless subdivisions of incalculable advantage. For hunger is a great storehouse of the benefits which help one in the afterlife. As one of the predecessors declared, hunger is the key to the afterlife and the gateway to renunciation, while satiety is the key to the world and the gateway to greed. This is very evident from the traditions which we have cited, which you may understand with insight by studying the details of each benefit so that you rise above the level of mere faith. However, if you do not come to learn these things but simply believe in the merit of hunger, you shall be at the level of those who receive their faith through imitation, taqleed, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. May Allah ta'ala give us tawfiq and grant us understanding and to enable us to be able to put this into practice in a way that is pleasing to Him. Ya Arhamar Rahimin. Barakallahu fikum. We have about 5 to 7 minutes. If there's any quick questions before we take a break. Ahlan wa sahlan.
Shake your head.